No risk it, no biscuit.
Coming from the Arizona desert, presented by SBNation.com. For Arizona Cardinals fans, by Arizona Cardinals fans, with outsider and insider's perspectives, this is Revenge of the Birds. Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans. This is Revenge of the Birds Radio. I am your host, Jess Root, as always. And on the line with me today is Seth Cox, as is the custom to do, as we do our show in review after a Cardinals football game. Seth, how are you doing?
Good, Jess. How are you?
I'm doing great. Hey, the Cardinals are having a fantastic start to the season. A little bit of fortune, a little bit of good play, good defense, and guess what? The Cardinals are 7-1. What do you say to that, Seth?
I say I'm slightly surprised at 7-1, but based on kind of what we've seen from the teams they played this far, I think you'd be slightly surprised if they weren't at least 6-2, if not 7-1 so far.
Well, as we get started today, Arizona Cardinals fans, in this episode of Revenge of the Birds Radio, this show is going to be our review of the Dallas Cowboys game, the game against the Dallas Cowboys, in which they won. It is also our mid-season review show, our mid-season special, as we will discuss, in addition to what happened on Sunday, we will discuss the midpoint of the season and give some grades and such. And this episode is brought to you by Audible.com, where you can find the internet's greatest selection of online audio content. Audible.com has a variety of audiobooks, podcasts, basically everything under the sun that you can think of when it comes to audio content. And we have a special for Revenge of the Birds Radio's listeners. If you'd visit audibletrial.com/Revenge of the Birds, you can test out the service, sign up for a free month, and get yourself a free audiobook download, something that I myself have done, that I did several months ago and have been using the service. I love it. I don't have as much time to read as I used to, so when I can, as I'm driving somewhere, I'm driving to the football game, or I've gone on a trip with the kids somewhere, I can hook up the audiobook, and I don't have to listen to them because suddenly they're quiet. So go ahead and check that out, audibletrial.com/Revenge of the Birds, and get yourself signed up and get that off free audiobook download. Today we're going to talk about, let's go over, I'm going to go over with you what happened on Sunday, a little bit some of the moves that the Arizona Cardinals have made, and then we'll get into the actual topic. So Cardinals fans, if you didn't watch the game, I imagine you did already. You saw the Arizona Cardinals take down the Dallas Cowboys. Mind you, a Tony Romo-less Dallas Cowboys, 28-17. They improved their record to 7-1, dropping Dallas as well, and taking over the number one seed in the NFC at the midpoint of the season. And then after that, after seeing the Denver Broncos get the doors blown out a bit by the New England Patriots, halfway through the season, the Arizona Cardinals have the best record in the NFL. Whether we are to believe that they are actually the best team in the NFL, they have the best record and certainly are in the conversation. Before the Cardinals took on the Cowboys, they made a couple of roster moves and have since made another roster move. Before the weekend, they added some depth at running back. They had signed and Northern Arizona running back Zach Bauman, whom they had in training camp, to the practice squad. And then because of the injury to Stephon Taylor, they had Andre Ellington, they had Marion Grice, and they had Robert Hughes. They promoted Kerwin Williams, a guy whom they signed to the practice squad, a guy that Bruce Arians knows from his days at Indianapolis, very familiar with him. Promoted him to the practice squad, let go nose tackle Bruce Gaston. Bruce Gaston was added to the practice squad on Monday, and that's where we stand roster-wise. The Arizona Cardinals started out the game. It was a little bit shaky. It kind of looked bad. Carson Palmer threw a pick six. on a third down pass early in the game. Then Dallas went and scored and took it. They ended up with a 10-0 lead, and it looks a little bit shaky, although the defense played fantastic. Arizona came back and threw actually a pretty good game by Andre Ellington, who ended up with 95 yards rushing on 21 carries and another 39 yards on 4 receptions. He scored a touchdown. Carson Palmer recovered nicely after that pick six and threw 3 touchdowns to the 1 interception. The defense held up, and the only touchdown they ended up giving as a defensive unit came in the last couple of minutes of the game when it was garbage time. But Carson Palmer threw 22 for 41 for I don't remember how many yards for the 3 touchdowns, the interception, and he targeted a whole bunch of different. These are the people that scored touchdowns on. He threw touchdowns to John Carlson, to Jerron Brown, and then into Andre Ellington. And then Marion Grice scored a touchdown on the ground. Some of the highlights: Arizona held DeMarco Murray, who had rushed for at least 100 yards in every single contest yet this season, held him to 79 yards rushing, breaking his record streak. Brandon Weeden, starting in place of Tony Romo, was pretty bad. He threw a pair of interceptions. He completed only 6 passes to his wide receivers. And the defense pretty much dominated that game. That combined with Arizona playing very well on third down overall, and you have yourself a victory of 28-17, a very convincing win at the end of the day, even though it wasn't a perfect game. They started out shaky, but the defense was fantastic. So we're going to talk about that. The Arizona Cardinals are now 7-1 with a 2-game lead over the Seattle Seahawks and a 3-game lead in the NFC West over the San Francisco 49ers, who fell to 4-4 after losing to the St. Louis Rams. And so Seth and I are going to talk about the good, the bad, talk about the concerns, the fantastic stuff. We're going to talk about some of the wrinkles that we saw during the game, as well as, how much difference would Tony Romo have made? We're going to talk a little bit of Patrick Peterson, who had a fantastic game, by the way. And then we're going to roll into the midseason awards. We're talking about grades. We're going to talk about who's been the most important, most valuable, best addition, that sort of thing. So, Seth, I'll go ahead and come on in the air, and we'll, instead of just listening to me ramble, we'll listen to 2 of us ramble. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
All right, so tell me, when it comes to the game, for you, what was the most impressive part of the victory for the Cardinals on Sunday?
I think it just continues to be the defense and how talented they are. Just how much they're able to. You don't want to say bail out the offense, but how much they're able to control the game. You look at what the Cardinals did on offense, and again, it was very much effective, if not really efficient, and that's what they need to be. You kind of mentioned it when you tweeted Burns from Burns and Gambo, and just told him, you thought the pass rush was the most important, or the biggest thing lacking, and to me, I responded, I think it's the fact that their offense isn't very efficient, but you know what? They don't turn the ball over at all, and they give their defense a chance. And when you have a really good defense, which the Cardinals still have, you're able to get away with maybe some not so efficient offense. And we've seen that with a bunch of teams this year. 6-2 Lions, same type of thing. It's just one of those things, and so far so good, and it's worked out, and I don't see any reason it shouldn't work out for the rest of the year, but we'll wait and see.
Well, number one for the most impressive thing is to see how dedicated the Cardinals were to stopping DeMarco Murray. Granted, it made it a little bit easier because they didn't have Tony Romo to worry about, who's actually a legitimate quarterback in the NFL, and they were going up against Brandon Weeden. Brandon Weeden looked lost out there, to be honest. But knowing that the Cardinals were going to. They knew they had to stop DeMarco Murray, and guess what? Seattle had the number one defense against the run at the time, and Dallas just absolutely dominated them. 79 yards. 79 yards is all it was. And for the most part, he did have a few. I mean, he broke off. I think. Let me look at the numbers. He had a 17-yarder. He had a 10-yarder. But the bulk of his yards really came on about 3 carries. He had about 3 carries that those 3 carries combined went for 35-ish yards, and then the other 16, went for 40. It was a very, very solid game, and we actually saw something new. We saw some 4-3 played by the Arizona defense, which I found was fantastic. I was very impressed with that. Another thing I was impressed, Andre Ellington looked like Andre Ellington from a year ago, and Patrick Peterson looked like a legit cover corner. Those are the things that stood out to me, followed by Dan Williams playing, as many have said, perhaps his best game as a professional football player.
Yeah, and he did it in 30 snaps?
30 snaps. 30 snaps, yes.
Yeah, that's what was so amazing is he did so much in so little, and it just makes everything. It shows you what talent there is. I know a lot of it's scheme, and scheme is important to a lot of these things, but they still have a lot of talent on this team, and I think when you look at it from that perspective and you see what individual players are doing each game, you're seeing guys step up in different circumstances and make plays, and that's something we've been waiting on, to be honest with you. I mean, it's definitely a team effort, but it seems like every game you get another guy that steps up. Obviously, Calais Campbell and Antonio Cromartie have kind of carried the torch all year of being the most consistent outside of the Denver game. But, you had Dan Williams, as you said, Patrick Peterson was really, really good. I thought, Tyrann Mathieu looks like he's back and healthy. He didn't play a ton of snaps, but don't tell anybody that. Tony Jefferson, it's just guys are making plays and stepping up in different weeks. We've talked about Ed Stinson on this show, Tommy Kelly. It's just a different guy is kind of leading, and then when you have the consistency and steadiness of Calais and Antonio, it makes everything else easier.
And that's just the point where you make about how someone else seems to step up every week. And this defense, as good as it's been against the run, now granted it's had some issues against the pass, and I'm going to point to that. They have been leading up to this game. They were dead last in pass defense because, and they got shredded by Nick Foles for over 400 yards. Peyton Manning shredded them. But if you look at kind of the reason why, if they had even an ounce of pass rush, anything resembling close to a pass rush, those numbers would be way down. The fact that they're doing as well as they're doing overall, because they're not giving a lot of points. They're just not giving up points. So they're moving down the field. They're taking the ball away. You have to continue to be impressed. And I'm going to say this. The Cardinals really did dodge a bullet, because when you can completely sell out against DeMarco Murray when you've got Brandon Weeding at quarterback and just say, okay, Brandon, you do something. And he's terrible. He's really not a good player.
No, and that showed up in the game and how bad he is as a player. And the other thing it did is it spotlights how important Drew Stanton is for this team and how much he means to this team. Being able to just kind of move on from Carson Palmer. Obviously, there's a slight change in game plan, but it's not very much, and you don't really lose anything. It's not saying Carson's not or Stanton's as good as Palmer. It's just he is good enough to not make mistakes and make timely throws.
Basically, the talent drop off from number one to number two for the Cardinals. Even though I'll tell you, Carson Palmer's a very, very talented quarterback. The drop off from number one to number two for the Cardinals isn't near as steep as most teams. You go from Tony Romo to Brandon Weeding, that is a huge drop off, and that's what a lot of teams run into because their starter gets paid so much money. Now Carson's paid handsomely, but he's not paid top dollar quarterback money, so they can spend more on a guy like Drew Stanton and get a higher quality backup.
Yeah, and that's an important thing in the NFL right now because we've seen it with even Philadelphia. I mean, make fun of Mark Sanchez all you want, but if you're Philly, you're probably okay with, not okay, obviously, but you don't feel the stress that you would feel going to Matt Barkley.
Mark Sanchez is probably going to steal that job from Foles because Sanchez, for as bad as he's a more talented quarterback than Nick Foles, and Chip Kelly just makes quarterbacks just throw up numbers like mad.
Exactly, and so like having that in Philadelphia, if they didn't have Mark Sanchez and they were going to Matt Barkley, I think everybody would be like, well, their season's done. They're not making the playoffs. This is a break for San Francisco or Seattle, to get kind of that fight for that wild card spot. Now with Mark Sanchez, yeah, maybe it takes a week, maybe it takes two, but you don't feel like they're going to miss too much. And if they can escape kind of like Arizona did in game one with Drew Stanton not really playing that well, but you get a special teams touchdown and you get a couple breaks from the Giants, fumbling the ball when nobody's around you and things of that nature, then you pick up a win. And again, the key thing is in the entire time, and I'm going to harp on this probably every show until it stops happening, they're not turning the ball over. So Drew Stanton didn't throw an interception. I mean, Drew Stanton didn't turn the ball over the entire time. So no matter the fact that he only threw, I think, 3 touchdowns in 3 games or whatever it was, that's not a problem because you know what? He threw 0 interceptions. He allowed the Cardinals to play a field position game. It's not sexy football, but it's effective football, and it wins games.
Oh, and as we get back to the whole not turnover, then we talk about no turnovers. Look at Carson Palmer's numbers through 8 games this year. He's got 11 touchdown passes, 2 interceptions. Now, mind you, he's played in 5 of those games. And so, but if you look at last year, I know through 7 games, I'll have to look at the game files again, but after 7 games, he had 8 touchdowns and 13 interceptions, I think it was, in 2013. And he had matched that. I mean, he had 8 touchdown passes through 7 games, albeit through 4 games he actually played, but 13 interceptions. And then this year he's got 2. And it was really now. I'll ask you this: how worried were you after that pick 6? Did you think, and you've said it several times, Carson Palmer is a quarterback who will have 1 or 2 really good games and then a stinker, and then another good game and then an A game and then a really good game and then a stinker. Did you think, oh crap, that's his stinker coming up?
Yeah, and I think it could have been if they didn't focus so much on the run and kind of regroup themselves. Arians came out doing Arians things. I mean, let's be honest. He came out and he wanted to throw the ball around the yard a little bit, and they ended up 36-30 split. That's not, or 36-32 split. That's not terrible. I mean, that's not a terrible split. It's not great by any means, but it takes pressure off of Carson and doesn't make him have to beat a team. And when you look at what they did, it's not the offense we expected to see. There was a lot of throws to the middle of the field, almost like the Cardinals were playing the Cardinals defense. But, that's how you beat that kind of Tampa 2 that Marinelli likes to run, and they took advantage over the middle. But most of his success comes short, and so it's not the typical Arians offense. It's not something that we're used to seeing. But the main thing was, and this is, what we know about Carson, the offensive line did a great job not giving up pressure. I only had him down for 10 pressures. And it makes a difference. It makes Carson Palmer a better quarterback. It makes Carson Palmer, a quarterback that you can win with. Obviously, next week's going to be a big test, so we'll see what happens.
It was interesting that we say that the offensive line actually played well, and I got that feeling. However, I look at the stat sheet, and he got hit 9 times according to the NFL stat sheet. He was hit 9 times, and so he was definitely, now part of that he can't afford to wait things out, but they did get to him twice. They hit him 9 times, so it wasn't like but there were enough plays, so it wasn't like he was under pressure every play. There's last year's offensive line, or the 2012 offensive line, where the only time that there wasn't pressure, they might not have gotten hit, but there was a hurry, or they had to change the route. They're doing it so much more consistently this year. They're still giving up a few. I mean, he's been sacked a few times, and he's been hit a few times, but the consistency is so much better. There are many plays where there is a super clean pocket, where maybe last year it didn't happen but 4 or 5 times a game.
Right, and something that we've seen with this team this year is a continuation of kind of the ability to have good stretches of pass blocking where you saw, I think it was early, if I remember right, where Carson got hit like 2 or 3 times in a row, and then all of a sudden it tightened up, and so things were better, and that's kind of what you want from your offensive line, especially when you're going to throw the ball as much as they want to. I mean, 36 passes is a lot, and you figure, it was 34 when you take out the sacks, but that's quite a bit of dropbacks. I mean, especially in a game where you are not seeing a ton of I'm trying to think of the word, but where your run game is so effective, so you probably could have run the ball more, but you chose to throw the ball. So it's just one of those things that you're happy with it, even though he did get hit a lot, like you said. It's not as bad as the numbers would have you believe it be.
Yeah, and tell me about. One of the things that as a very underrated part of the game, I thought, was the play of Andre Ellington, who ran very effectively. You look at the numbers: 21 carries for 95 yards. That's a much, much more effective game. He was 4.5 yards a carry, as opposed to, the 3.7 he was averaging up until that point this year. And that was on top of, he had a couple of decent runs that were erased by penalties as well. So he came out at the very end of the game. We gave Marion Grice a few carries and it got him the touchdown. So Ellington, by all accounts, should have had over 100 yards. But he also picked up another 39 yards through the air. He had 25 touches. But just that 5 touches less, it didn't seem like he was overworked like when he got the 30 touches the week previous. And you're like, wait a minute. So he got 25 touches, but it's really effective. And I got the feeling, oh goodness, as Ellington finally hit his stride for the season, this could be exciting for the rest of the season if that's the case.
Right, and I think what it boils down to is it's kind of twofold in Ellington's effectiveness. Stop running behind tight ends because they're fairly terrible, especially John Carlson when it comes to blocking. And 2, follow your strengths, and your strengths in the run game are your tackles. So it's kind of a catch-22 because you can't really rely on your tight ends to block, even though Rob Hausler's been good. Just don't tell anybody that. but you can't really run on the interior. Um, whatever's going on with Larson and Faneca, it looks like at this point Cooper's just not going to play unless there's an injury. Um, so, because you and I have talked about it, we talked about it on the show. It's been talked about ad nauseum on social media. Just most of the pressure comes from the interior of the line. So, if they're not worried about it, then obviously they're not going to make a change at this point. So, you have to find a way to continue to run those plays. This team's a better zone team right now than a power team. I think that bothers Arians a little bit, but it's coming to fruition. You're kind of seeing it where they're able to carry momentum in the running game throughout the game as opposed to, running 5 times and then you're done and then we're going to pass the next, 20 plays and then we're going to be ahead and we're going to run 15 times over the last quarter to kind of skew the numbers a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Tell me, what was something else from the good side that you thought? Now, as I was watching, there was a lot of talk about the play of Patrick Peterson and how he shut down Des Bryant. I will tell you, from what I saw, Peterson covered Bryant very well. But Patrick Peterson was not who shut down Des Bryant. That was Brandon Weeding. His throws were all over the place. Bryant dropped a couple of passes. Although I will say Peterson did cover him very well. Did you get a chance to look back and grade Peterson out and say how actually effective he was against Bryant and how much it was just bad quarterbacking?
I'd say it's like 50-50. I thought Patrick played a good game. I texted you that during the game. Said I thought this was his best game so far this season. But, I mean, let's be honest. We already talked about it, but Brandon Weeden was really fairly awful. A lot of balls, open throws that were missed by Weeden. It benefited the Cardinals, and they took advantage of it. And what ends up happening when you only complete 18 passes is you end up you don't see a ton of success, and that's kind of what it was for Dez. He got kind of his numbers at the end of the game in terms of just fantasy type stuff, but he dropped a couple passes, which Dez does. He wasn't. I mean, 2 catches on 6 targets. That's a win for Patrick Peterson. And I know he gave up the touchdown late. That can kind of go back to our question about focus for him. Something we've kind of talked about before, but I think overall you have to be excited and happy with the way he played this game.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought he played well, and what you tell is that he was much. And I don't know what it was. Maybe now Patrick Peterson has had his struggles this year. I wonder how much of that has to do with the fact that he hasn't been asked to shadow a guy for the most part. If you look at the games where he played pretty well, one was Denver because he had Emmanuel Sanders pretty much out of the game. And you look at this game against Des Bryant, he was following a guy around the field, and I think he really lives up. He steps up for challenges like that, as opposed to what he's been doing. He's been treated as an equal with Antonio Cromartie, and they've been doing sides of the field. I wonder how much that bothered him. And just because of the fact, okay, we're going to line you up against Bryant, and how much that meant to him and how much it helped him focus. Because he has, and Steve kind of admitted, he's had some focus issues recently.
Right, and I think that's kind of what it is. Like you said, he's I don't know if he's getting lackadaisical or what, but it's been definitely good to see him the last couple weeks and watch him kind of get back into it. So it's been important, and I think we've seen it trending up. Hopefully, it continues. It's unfortunately. I mean, Brian Quick is a good receiver, but I think he's injured. I could be wrong. for the Rams. So we'll see kind of what happens when he doesn't have that number one to follow around this week, and see if maybe we get another kind of lazy Patrick Peterson game. Yeah, he didn't play this week, so looks like Brian Quick's injured for the Rams, which is, their number one wide receiver. So we'll see what happens. See if that continues. It'll be interesting to see where he plays this week and how he plays, considering how well he played when he was, like you said, locked up against the number one all day.
So I've got to ask you this, and this is a fair question. The Cardinals, you only get to play the games on your schedule. However, how much of it do you think Tony Romo makes? Do they, with the way the Cardinals played, do you think Tony Romo, even if it's a slightly hobbled Tony Romo, obviously he would have been in pain, do the Cardinals still win that game?
I don't know. It's hard to say no, but the one thing I'll say, and the thing that nobody kind of understands, or maybe they understand, they just don't want to admit, but you watch the beginning of that game and the pick six, and then the one kind of semi productive drive, I think, was on the next series, and they got up 10-0. Am I right on that?
Yes.
And so you look at that, and that is probably a little bit different with Romo in the game. You get that pick six, and again, we have to just assume that the pick six happens, because we can't.
You can't undo that. There was no reason to take it away.
So if that happens, and so the Cardinals go 3 and out, I think, on the next drive. Yep, and then, or no, they get a first down, then they go 3 and out. And then you have a pretty sustained drive. I mean, they went from the 17 to the 34, and the last kind of 3 plays were an incomplete pass, or a 1-yard swing pass to DeMarco Murray, and another incomplete pass. You wonder how that drive turns out, and that would be the one thing I would say could have been different, is if the Cowboys go up 14-0 instead of 10-0 on that drive, the second drive to start the game. I think that can possibly make a difference, but I think they're a more balanced team with Romo, and so that could be the other problem that gives the Cardinals a little bit of fits, but it wasn't completely, I don't think, wrong if you think that's gonna, that doesn't make a difference, because I think the way the Cardinals played after the first quarter, that was probably their best 3 quarters of the season.
It was fantastic. Now, Tony Romo, the one thing that's going to be different is that he can rally a team. As much as, and I know you disagree, but if I had the choice, Tony Romo, if I had the choice between a healthy Tony Romo and a healthy Carson Palmer, I'd take a healthy Tony Romo every single time. I like him that much as a quarterback. How much of a difference he makes in this game? I think he makes a difference, and I think it becomes a much more interesting game. I don't think it is as dominated, and the Cardinals probably would have had to change their defensive scheming because they sold out against the run completely, and they basically said, "Okay, Brandon Weeden beat us." They ran some 8-man sets up front. They had the 4-3s. They had a few 4-4s. They basically said, "Okay, beat us down the field. We know you're not going to be able to do it," and Romo can, and that's where the pass rush comes in. Peyton Manning destroyed them because they could not get any pressure on him. They've been lucky that quarterbacks like Phillip Rivers and Eli Manning were unable to take advantage of that, and that was in part because of the play down the field in the back of the secondary. Tony Romo is the type of quarterback that can do what Peyton Manning did, and so I don't think that necessarily. I don't think that the Cowboys necessarily would win, because if Tony Romo plays, he's hobbled, and it's not going to be as effective. And we saw how he looked when he came back in against Washington. But I definitely think this is a much different ball game with Romo. So I think Cowboys fans have reason to be disappointed and to still claim, say, hey, you didn't beat it, you didn't play us at our best, at our full strength, you played our backup, and that's fair. But at the end of the day, you play the guys that are on the field opposite you, and they still got the win, and they're 7-1. So it's a great win either way.
Yeah, and you only can play who's on your schedule. So at this point, you can't get upset when they win games that they should. Upset when people point it out. It's unfortunate. The Cardinals have kind of lucked out in certain situations. I mean, last week they played the Eagles with a lot of injuries, and let's be honest, those were important injuries. And then you have, this week the Cowboys were without 3 starters on the offense and offensive line, and the difference being that the Cardinals have done a good job of creating depth. Their scheme on defense allows them to kind of, as much as it sounds terrible, next man up the next thing, and then we'll see, and we've seen quarterback play, again, we talked about it earlier, the fact that the drop-off from Stanton to Palmer to Stanton is not really that, severe. It's not a big deal. So you're able to not have to worry about, Brandon Weeden out there throwing the ball to the other team.
So let's talk a little bit. How surprised were you to see let's talk a little bit about the defense. And again, this is Revenge of the Birds Radio. This is Jess Root. I'm talking to my co-host, Seth Cox, as we always do every week, Tuesday night, Wednesday, when we record the show. It's after the Arizona Cardinals have played a game, and we're reviewing the game. And at this point, we're going to be talking about the midseason grades as we move on. We saw a surprise at the beginning of the game when the Arizona Cardinals came out in a 4-3 on the defense. Steve Keim spoke about it. Steve Keim spoke about it on the radio on Monday with Doug and Wolf on Arizona Sports, and said it was a comment that to go against that rushing attack, that the very good rushing attack and the very talented offensive line. Todd Bowles told him, "Hey, I want to do a little wrinkle, something they haven't seen on film yet." And there they had it. The first time we've seen a true 4-3 played. And what Keim said is that Dallas has had great success running the football with their center uncovered. And so what they did, they brought in a 4th defensive lineman. They had one of them covering Travis Frederick. And they were able to move that line around. And if you look at, again, this defensive line, you've got Calais Campbell, you've got Tommy Kelly, you've got Frosty Rucker, a couple of grizzled veterans, and then Dan Williams, and they played fantastic. However, I will note there's something very notable is you're going up against a rushing attack that's very good. And who do you have sitting on the sideline for a whole lot of the game? A 2nd-round draft pick in Kevin Minter, who has the reputation of being a very, very good run stuffer. He only played a handful of snaps again. Why do you think that is? I mean, was it just because they wanted extra beef in there, or why would you have played Minter more when they done more of base 3-4s?
Who were the linebackers in that kind of set?
It was Acho, Okafor, and Foote.
That's right.
And every once in a while, for a couple of snaps, there was Alexander. But it was pretty much Acho and Okafor.
Yeah, and you kind of, I've said my piece on the Foote thing. He's been decent. I know he got that halfway season all-pro team on Monday.
I found it like, really?
Yeah, I think it's more just his totals are really awesome. So people are like, oh, he must be playing well. But Andy Benoit watches a lot of tape, so he's he's not uninformed. I just disagree with him on that. You know, Okafor hasn't played well, and Ajo hasn't exactly played outstanding the last couple weeks on defense. I thought it was effective when they ran it against the run, obviously, and you look at kind of their run defense numbers and how well they played. I've just said it, and I'll continue to say it. I think Foote is out there because of his I don't want to say legacy, but the fact that he understands the game from
his instincts, his ability to read plays and see what's developing before they happen.
But he's not. I don't think he's as talented right now as Minter. But the problem is we don't know until it happens. So,
and that sounds like unless Foote gets hurt, it's not going to happen until next year. As we see another year of Minter's career sort of disappear as he is beat out or playing behind a veteran, an old guy like Carlos Dansby and Larry Foote, who put up gaudy numbers, and which leads you to believe, well, it's you hear what they say about Minter, but then how they act with Minter means, maybe they don't quite trust him as much as they say they do.
Right, and that's the question: is he having a problem grasping concepts? 11 snaps against a run-heavy offense is kind of head scratching. I know Dallas ended up throwing the ball a ton, so it's not necessarily a straight run-stopping game. But early in the game, you figured you would have seen him a little bit more. So it's one of those things that you kind of just watch. And St. Louis this week is another team that's going to run the ball a lot with Trey Mason. So you'll watch that and see how many snaps he gets, and you'll just continue to watch the situation and kind of gauge it. And it's one of those things where you're not getting any contribution from your first-round pick last year, and you're not getting a ton of contribution from your second-round pick last year. So you're wondering when those guys are going to play. If it's year 3, then you have to also wonder what's happening between year 2 and year 3 that's made them ready to make an impact, especially when you're going to hopefully be coming off a 12, 13 win season.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about it as well. This is actually more related to after the game. Patrick Peterson had a great game. Bruce Arians made an interesting comment about how he had been going through things that nobody knew about. It was revealed Monday that they were health related, which puzzles me to say the least. Why he would bring it up? Oh, we know he had the ankle injury. Maybe the ankle injury was more severe than they were leading on. He was playing through it. I don't know. But the way it talked, it sounded like it was something else. But it obviously couldn't have been something too physical, because that would have had to have been, mentioned on an injury report. So maybe something emotional, something mental. It just opened this door that didn't need to be opened. It's almost, to me, it would have been better for Bruce Arians to say he's had some disappointing games, he's had some challenges, but now he's playing better, rather than say he's been going through things nobody knows and then not reveal them. I wonder if Patrick will open up at all about it during this week, if he'll be available to the media, and then the reporters can ask him that, because really, just very odd that would be, anything would be said. Almost in a but very different way about John Abraham, how they're so tight-lipped about everything about Abraham in training camp.
I wonder if it's a health issue or something of that nature that would make him say that, where they don't want to reveal too much because of, I don't know, they're trying to hide. I don't know. You know how the games are with injuries in the NFL, people hiding things and stuff like that. So it's interesting. Um, yeah, you'd almost rather Arians just say, hey, he's struggled and he's finally putting it together, and then look at the outcome. Maybe he took a little too easy to begin the season, and now he's putting in the work, and we're working with him, and things are coming back to where we expect them to be.
Do you just? I mean, it's hard to even speculate on any of it. Do you think it was something physical? Do you think it was something more between his ears? If you had to speculate,
well, like we said earlier, I think he's been a little almost aloof to start the season. He played really well against Denver, and Cromartie didn't, and since then he's played better. So you almost wonder if watching Cromartie struggle against Denver, and then he had the touchdown thing against Washington, I guess I'll call it. But against Oakland and Philly and Dallas, he's played well. So obviously against Philly he got hurt, but he played well. He's playing. I think he's getting more accustomed to not playing with his hands as much, which is always been a problem for him. He's always been crabby. He got away with it at LSU, and he just had never adjusted, and now it's coming, kind of.
well, especially with the new rules, the rules that make it tough. In fact, I read an article. It was in ESPN the magazine. Patrick described his technique, and it involves his technique is to kind of keep a hand on the guy's hip the whole time, and until so he can kind of tell and kind of maneuver a little bit without grabbing. So it's barely within the rules, and maybe even a little less within the rules now than it's been in the past. And so his style of play is not quite what fits the NFL today.
Right, and he's too physical. His technique is still sloppy. I mean, that's something that I've talked about before. I talked about it on that TD against the Redskins. His technique is still not great. He's more athlete than kind of corner still, and that's important because you see the results of that where he's not always effective, and so I think focusing in on technique, having to really channel his focus, you've seen the results of that, and like we said, it's been better.
So let's take a little bit, move past the Dallas game. Is now the game's over, 7-1. We're at the midpoint of the season. Let's talk mid-season performance. Grade some of the positions, surprises, disappointments. So let's talk a little bit of that as we go into kind of the mid-season special part of our show. And again, listeners, this is Revenge of the Birds Radio. I'm Jess Root. We're talking with Seth Cox, as we do every beginning of the week, middle of the week, following a Cardinals game. And now we're going to talk about, this is our mid-season special. Let's talk about, well, let's do grades. Before we do awards at the midpoint, let's do grades. Let's look at the offense overall, the defense overall. If I were to grade the offense on the whole, I'd have to give it about B minus. I said B minus because they're coming up big plays, they're not turning the ball over, but it definitely could be better. I don't know whether it would be a C plus or a B minus if I had to grade it. How would you go with the offense overall?
I would say C plus. I think it's just one of those things where it's been, like I've said, I've called it inefficiently effective. They don't sustain drives. They don't eat up a ton of clock. They don't do any one thing particularly well except hit big plays and not turn the ball over, which in the NFL, it's so simple, I know, but you win the turnover battle, you win the football game, and we've seen that for the Cardinals for the last 8 weeks. So
It's obviously a
outside of the
trend.
Denver game, yeah, outside of the Denver game where they were just clearly not, they were clearly an inferior team that day. Um, the team that hasn't turned the ball over has won.
Defensively, if I had to look at a defensive unit as a whole, obviously there hasn't been the pass rush. They've given up quite a few yards passing, but they get turnovers. They're not allowing a lot of points. And so I can't quite grade them an A, but I'm going to give them a solid B plus. They have things that they can improve, but if you look at how the Cardinals are winning games, the defense is a huge part of that. And overall, they are still the strength of the team. They're playing opportunity. Get opportune sort of contributions on offense, but on defense, especially with the hodgepodge mix of guys that you've got playing, you've got Alex Okafor and Sam Acho and Frosty Rucker and Tommy Kelly and Larry Foote. You've got this strange group of front seven who's producing. But it's not. I wouldn't say it's an A type quality defense yet because of the issues they have in getting to the quarterback, which leads to a lot of yards overall down the field. So B plus would that be a fair assessment, or would you grade them higher or lower?
I mean, B plus A minus. You're really splitting hairs at that point. Because like you said, the two issues are, well, and kind of one issue's been fixed, but they're not getting to the quarterback, and they weren't creating a ton of turnovers early in the season, and now we're seeing that kind of flipped. And so I think if you continue to see them play the way they have the last several weeks, you're going to see more in terms of wins. But right now it's been the last 5 games. I mean, they've gone 2-4-0, but then 3-2 in terms of turnovers. So it's all about finding a continuation and continuing to be successful. And do what you're good at, and rushing the passer is not what they're good at right now. So find ways to make that not kill you, and they've been able to do that so far.
Well, let's look at the specific position groups. Quarterback position. I think based on I'm not even grading this on a curve based on previous years. When you look at the play at quarterback, if we look specifically at Carson Palmer, he's got to get an A this year. The guy's throwing touchdowns. He's playing pretty well in the red zone. It wasn't the case with Drew Stanton. He's playing well on third down, and he's not turning the ball over. That you can't ask anything more of. You really can't expect more from Carson Palmer than what you've gotten out of him this year, other than not get hurt, not drive his shoulder into a defensive back and miss 3 games.
Yeah, I think you give an A. I think it's an A more so because of what Stanton was able to do in terms of making you not miss Palmer than any. I mean, Palmer's been really good this year, so don't get that wrong or twist what I'm saying. But it's been more important that for 3 games they had successful, competent quarterback play where Carson Palmer, your starter, was gone. That's hard for a lot of teams in the NFL to say that they could get that. So I think it's an A because you've gotten an A, performance from Palmer, but you've gotten an A performance from your backup. So that's even more important.
Running back, you've got we'll look at the position as a whole. If you look at Andre Ellington, I guess he's playing a little bit with some injury issue. He hasn't been quite the same. I still think his play overall is worth an A minus, but the position at the whole is probably looking at maybe a C plus, simply because now that's not necessarily their fault because the Arians isn't using anyone else. Stephon Taylor is really meh. Jonathan Dwyer, while the running game was more effective, wasn't particularly productive. Marion Grice, we've yet to see. Robert Hughes, interesting thing about Robert Hughes, he's been raved about for his blocking and his pass catching ability. He's missed a lot of blocks. He gave up a blocked punt on one of his missed assignments. He's dropped passes. He's a solid guy that you have at the back of the, but he's not been that guy that Bruce Arians said he was. I think you have to give the whole position about a C plus, but the play of Ellington B plus, A minus, because he's still producing and he's still on track to have a fantastic year in terms of volume, not necessarily a per play basis.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Ellington's done a lot of good so far, and he's also had a lot of those, as I've called him on this show, kind of grinded out performances where he wasn't Ellington that we're used to. He was just kind of Rashard Mendenhall. I think losing Dwyer because he's an idiot hurt, and I think not having capable blocking in terms of your tight ends, as Nicholas has been injured most of the season, and like you said, Robert Hughes has been decent, but not, I wouldn't say great by any means, and it just causes too many issues overall, and that's something that needs to be cleaned up in the second half. I think if you see a lot more games like the Cowboys games where you don't have to get 100 yards, but even if you're at 80 yards on only 18 or 17 carries, that's doing enough in the running game to kind of balance you out. I would hope that if you're averaging 4.5 yards a carry, you're going to do a little bit more running. But I mean, we know that's not really Arians' MO, so that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah,
anyways,
he never says a balanced offense. He says he has to run the ball effectively when you need to. He is so not about running the ball unless they're just doing it really well. That's just really interesting about that. About the receivers. Go ahead.
I think that's just what. Oh, okay. I was just going to say. So I think if you give it a B, you're happy with it, because if just from the raw numbers, if I told you at the beginning of the year that Ellington was averaging only 3.8 yards per carry, you would have been like, wow, this was a horrible decision to put him as your feature back. But I think the way it's happened and kind of how the Cardinals have had to figure out how to rearrange the running game on the fly it makes it you're okay with it. I wouldn't say okay, but it's more understandable.
Let's look at the receivers. You've got Larry Fitzgerald, who's turned out to he's been interesting to watch. You could tell he's healthy. He's making plays. He hasn't had as many but he's being a difference maker this year. He's catching the ball. He understands his role, and he's running over people. It's so fun to see him play. Ted Ginn had a couple of decent plays. John Brown's made some plays. John Brown, my goodness, has looked good, and then he's had some drops. Drops have really been a problem. Michael Floyd has been hot and cold. I think that this has been one of the more disappointing units as a whole, and I'm going to be a little bit harsh. Actually, at best, from the receiving core, because of the drops and some of the inconsistencies, I see at best you could give a C plus, and that's really harsh considering it's a group that has Larry Fitzgerald and Michael Floyd. But Floyd just hasn't been. He saw flashes, but then he just stopped. And Fitz, he looked like he wasn't going to do much, but then he did better. And maybe it's just because of the way they run their offense. You're not going to feature any particular one player, but there's just. I don't know. Maybe I'm just being too hard. Is C plus too hard on the receivers?
No, I think that's fair. I would probably give it a C, because I mean you have, well, I shouldn't say that. Probably C plus, because you have a probably I would say Fitz would even call his year like a B type. I think you give A's to the Browns, just because a rookie in second-year kind of undrafted guy playing as well as they are, I think you're fine with that. And then in my midterm, I gave Floyd a C minus. I went back and looked because I was kind of interested after you and I have had numerous Floyd conversations. And in his career, Floyd has only had one set or, two games of 100-yard games in a row. So, like, he's only once in his entire career had back-to-back 100-yard receiving games. And I was kind of shocked by that because I thought last year he put it together better. But he only had two last year, and he came in back-to-back weeks. He just is not a consistent receiver, more so than he is a dominant physical specimen who can take advantage of situations based on who's covering him. And so I think that's kind of where that ends up, because he's not he still doesn't look like he gets the ins and outs of being a wide receiver. He's more of a guy that you throw the ball up to and allow him to go make a play, as opposed to a guy that you look at a lot of Palmer's throws on down and distances that are must gets, and they're not going in Floyd's direction. And I think that kind of tells you something about where his trust level is with Floyd still at this point.
So, you wrote a piece about this. I don't know if you remember it. It was after his rookie year, maybe it was in the off season, and it's kind of what Floyd is and what he could be. People see Floyd as perhaps a Larry Fitzgerald type, an Anquan Bolden type. You saw him based on his skill set, what he did in his rookie year, what he's really good. He's really good at high pointing the ball. He's very physical. What is the name of the receiver who played for Carolina? Was it, or Jacksonville? Muhammad, is that who you compared him to?
Yeah, Muhsin Muhammad, kind of that bigger guy that can, and that's what Muhsin did a lot, early in his career. And he was a guy that can be your really good number two guy, a guy that you can rely on in terms of, every once in a while putting up 100, 120 yards and a touchdown, but most of the time he's going to go out and give you 5 catches for 50 yards and kind of be able to make some jump ball plays and generally allow you to have single coverage everywhere, because he is enough of a threat to go and get the ball, but he's not dominant enough, or a great receiver where he's going to command double coverage to free up other guys.
All right, tight ends. This has been a disappointing group between Troy Nicholas, being hurt all the time. Rob Hausler has been, Rob Hausler really hasn't had any issues. John Carlson, who had such a great training camp, really been, not good at blocking, and then dropping passes. He's looking a lot like Rob Hausler. It's almost like he and Rob Hausler swapped jerseys. Maybe you can give them a D. I mean, maybe you can give that group a D.
Is it too early for me to say I told you so about John Carlson?
Well, yeah.
No, I mean, and it wasn't even like I.
Hey,
said it was
he hasn't gotten concussed yet. Okay, let's give him something.
Well, and that was my whole concern with him coming in, was just that he hasn't been on the field much, and when he is on the field, he hasn't been great the last couple of years. I think a C minus D type of grade is fair. I think you give Carlson does he get an F? And then you look at what your other tight ends have done. Nicholas
just hadn't been used. They're just not using
Nicholas
him.
And Phil have combined for 80 or 90 snaps on the season. So you can't really grade them that much. And then Hausler's getting, I think, 20% of the snaps, and he's not really been bad, but he hasn't been good. So
He's
it's just
been
kind of
there.
worse.
He's been
Yeah,
there.
exactly. He's been there. He has improved as a run blocker. I'll give him that. When you watch him play, he is a better run blocker than he was at any time under the Ken Wisenhunt era. So I think for that you're okay with what he's done. Again, just the round selection and the hype has created an unrealistic expectation for Hausler, so nobody will ever say that he's done a good job, even if he's doing a good job at one specific thing.
Offensive line. Outside, the edge's been good. Interior, not so. I mean, Lyle Sunline. He's been Lyle Sunline. Yeah, you can't really. But the guard play hasn't been particularly good. The tackle play's been really pretty good. As a whole, I mean, you have to based on the fact that they. I mean, the running game could be better, but in pass protection, they've really kept Palmer protected. You give that group. I mean, it's definitely not an A. B minus. And you have to be pleased with that. A B minus, maybe a C plus. But if you're looking at in previous offensive lines, I mean, you went from having F and D to this is a serviceable offensive line. You have good play on the edges. You have some question in the middle. But when you anchor the edges as well as they do, it does a lot.
Yeah, and I think if you look at it as a whole, this offensive line is really average in terms of NFL comparison. I mean, I think you'd rank them in the top, 15 to 18 range in terms of offensive line groups.
That's so much better than it has been.
In terms of Cardinals specific, it makes it an A. But if you just put it in terms of the NFL, they're a C plus, like you said. They're average, which is so much better than anything we've seen ever. I mean, since the Super Bowl year, I mean, after they got rid of Mike Gandy and thought Levi Brown could play left tackle, I mean, that 2008 line was good. I mean, I wouldn't say good. They were very average too. It was very similar to this year's line. You have a left tackle who's more in both the run and pass game. You have a young right tackle who's a better run blocker than pass blocker, and then you have guards that are kind of just there, and you have Lyle Sunderline. So it's basically the same offensive line. It's just better names at this point. So
it goes to the defensive side of the ball. Defensive line, obviously, they have done an A job. Solid. You can almost say A plus for what they've done and to be able to hold up and just stand up so strongly against opposing offensive lines and against the run. We haven't seen much from Calais Campbell in terms of sacks. But granted, you're not really have no threat anywhere else. I mean, when Dan Williams gets a sack, I mean, it's a surprise. So yeah, I mean, what do you have? I mean, but that defensive line as a whole, what it's asked to do, you have to give the defensive line an A.
Yeah, A plus. And I think
can you grade it higher than that?
Right. Well, and I think the fact that it's mostly, quote unquote backups. I mean, they're not backups in the sense that they're just more depth. It's rotational depth. I mean, you were going to see Rucker. I think you would see less of Stinson. If everybody was healthy, you were going to see Rucker and less of Stinson. I don't know if Tommy Kelly's even signed.
No, probably not. No, and the thing is with Frosty Rucker and Tommy Kelly, these are NFL starters. Granted, they are NFL starters for bad teams. Frosty Rucker was a starter in Cleveland.
Yes.
Tommy Kelly was a starter in the Raiders. So they are starting quality players, but they're players who have been starters on bad teams. But a starting quality player on a bad team makes a great backup for a good team. And it makes them, especially since they've been a starter and they're coming from bad teams, they tend to make the perfect match for a talented team that has goals of going far.
And what it allows them to do is match up things because they all do something different. Rucker isn't the biggest, isn't the biggest kind of Rutgers, your jack of all trades, master of none type. I mean, I don't think when you look at Frosty's game, you're going to go, oh wow, he's an elite pass rusher, or he's this or that. But when you look at just what he does on a consistent basis, he doesn't get beat in the run game, and he can get some pressure on the quarterback. Tommy Kelly, same type of thing. He's not the pass rushing force he was when he was younger, but he does a good job collapsing the pocket, getting interior pressure. Ed Stinson, you can't say enough good things about his ability to stop the run. Kareem Martin's been a bit of a disappointment so far, but I mean that's expected of a third.
And he was a project at that.
Yeah,
he hasn't flashed. He hasn't had the sacks, which is what we thought he would get at least, to be like maybe a lesser version of Alden Smith. I was hoping for.
Yeah, and then you have, of course, Dan Williams, who's been phenomenal. I think the one disappointment, and this is just really nitpicking, but the one disappointment has been Alameda Teamu's lack of playing time, and not even his play, just the lack of the fact that he's barely out there. I think that'll be your one, if you want to take this down from an A+ or an A-, the fact that Teamu's not back yet, that's kind of disappointing. But I mean, that's just really kind of trying to find something.
Linebackers. This is an interesting group because off the edge, I mean, Alex Okafor has flashed a little bit in the passing game. Not much, just a little bit. Acho's been solid in pretty much everything but the pass rush. Matt Shaughnessy's hurt. Elite against the run. You can get Larry Foote, who's put up great numbers. Kevin Minter, but overall, this is a very average at best linebacking core. They have their roles. And you've seen a little bit of Marcus Bernard. Thomas Kaiser got a little bit of time. Lorenzo Alexander's got a little bit of time. I don't think you could grade this group really any higher than a C. They're very average. And average, I think, would be a compliment to them, especially if you look at, and the only reason is because of the defense they're on. You put them on another defense, another group of defenders behind them and in front of them, they are much worse. But because they're on such a good defense, I think you can call them an average group. You can grade them with an average grade because of the talent around them.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think Acho is such a nice guy that we give him a pass on kind of his play because he flashes like every third game. He flashes a really, really, really good game, and then he's just kind of out there. Okafor had the 2 sacks, and I don't think he's really done anything since then. Alexander hasn't played at all. Marcus Bernard isn't getting any snaps, but when he's out there, he plays well. It's a lot of Larry Foote. I mean, it's been a lot of Larry Foote, and I think that's okay. I think again, you want to see more from Acho and Okafor. You know what you're going to get from Minter and Foote at this point. So, and then I think if you grade Buchanan as a linebacker, since he's played linebacker mostly, then you raise that grade to like a C+, because I don't think he's been as bad as Pro Football Focus has rated him, but I don't think he's been as good as Cardinals fans and coaches have painted him. I think he's fallen right in the middle. I think like Pro Football Focus, if you were to give him a letter grade based off his play, it would probably be like a C-. And I think if you ask Cardinals fans, it's a B+. And I think a C+, B- is probably exactly where he's played about to this point. And I think that's accurate and fair.
Oh, I forgot to mention, we saw Dale Buchanan play safety for the first time in some base sets. He was actually a starter on the field at safety. It wasn't Tony Jefferson. Tony Jefferson apparently, for whatever reason, whether it was because of the time off, because of a concussion, he was not in some of those sets, and it was Buchanan out there at least to start the game out there at safety with Rashad Johnson when they ran those 4-3 sets to start. So we got to see him a little bit playing his actual position.
Were you surprised he didn't play much in the game?
No. And that was, I'll look at it again, but there were a few plays where they only went with one safety when they early in the game. They went with a 4-3 nickel idea where they kept the seven man in the box, but they brought in Gerard Powers, and so there were times when it was only Rashad Johnson out on the field.
Yeah, and Matthew didn't play a ton either. I was just curious if we didn't talk about it during the game segment, but yeah, I mean, I thought when his snaps at safety, he played in a lot of zone, which is something I've talked about a lot. His ability in zone, he's really good in zone. So I wish they'd do it more. They're not asking him to rush the passer as much, which I'm very happy about.
He wasn't good at it.
No, and it's fine because they're 7-1, so you can afford to screw around a little bit, if you will, and mix and match figure things out. So I think they did a good job with that. But yeah, I think if you put Buchanan in as the linebacker, grade, I think it bumps it up slightly because of his versatility and his effectiveness against the run and playing in that zone coverage.
And defensively, we got the defensive backs. I don't know if we're great cornerbacks and safeties differently, but I think you have to look at the defensive backs on the whole. But on the whole, looking between Gerard Powers, who's really had, outside of one game where he had some struggles, he's been really good this year. Patrick Peterson's been up and down. Antonio Cromartie really only had one bad game. Rashad Johnson's been, he's had some good play. I mean, Matthew's back. You have to look at that defensive secondary, and I think it rates up there as a high B.
Yeah, I'd say B plus. I think that's completely fair. They do such a good job changing up schemes and disguising what they're doing and giving the offense different looks that it allows them to be so what's the word I'm looking for? Versatile. And do different things and kind of compete in different ways. And that's something that we were expecting to see and we didn't early. And now it's kind of coming to fruition. We saw it in the Philly game, especially at the end with those plays by Matthew and Buchanan. And now, again, how much of it was Brandon Weeden being terrible and how much of it was the secondary being really good. I think, it was 50-50, but I think the secondary made plays when they had the ability to and the chance to, and that's something that we should be excited to see.
Let's give some awards out for the season, the midpoints of the season. Who would you give the Cardinals MVP to overall? If you had to pick an MVP of the team, and then we'll go offensive player of the mid-year and defensive player. Who would you give that MVP to?
Probably Ellington, just because he allows them to do so much, and he really, even though he hasn't been super effective, he is doing a lot for them in terms of opening up other aspects of the game and kind of carrying the team's rushing attack that's not very good, at times, and the pass blocking isn't great. So I think I would give it to Ellington.
And I'm going to give it to Carson Palmer because we knew going into the season kind of that this season was going to hang on Palmer's shoulders. And what's he been? He's been super effective. And guess what? They're winning. So I think I would give the team MVP to Carson Palmer, even though we kind of saw the team kind of function still well without him. I still think that because of what he is to that team, he's the leader. They kind of, but between the personality of Bruce Arians, his demeanor, Carson Palmer's demeanor, is what makes this team tick. They don't get too high, they don't get too low, and they're very resilient and they're very tough, and that's what Carson Palmer brings. Ellington, though, I would say is the offensive player of the year. I would make him as the top offensive player because he makes the offense tick. Palmer beats it's interesting because Palmer kind of is the leader of the team, but you look at the way Ellington plays, the offense, his season is kind of a microcosm of the offense as a whole. He's still on pace for about 1,700 yards on the season from scrimmage. I'd give him offensive player of the year. Would you give it to somebody else if you had to pick an offensive player of the year?
Offensive player of the year, I'd probably give it to John Brown, just because he gives them that deep threat with the ability to run after the catch, something I'll talk about in my article tomorrow that Floyd hasn't given them.
Preview.
And so I think, for now, I would say that. I would say Brown.
Defensive player of the year. This one's, I think the most important player is Calais Campbell. You could argue Patrick Peterson as well. But if you have to say defensive player of the year, I'm gonna give it to Gerard Powers, who's been a playmaker for the Cardinals. He's forced fumbles. He's picked off passes. Thus far, I'm giving that one to Gerard Powers.
You're not allowed to like him. Didn't you read the message boards?
He was going to be cut, according to a lot of people, remember? Because he cost so much.
Yeah. It's hard for me not to give it to Calais because he's just the only consistent force on the defensive line. Like we talked about, I think I guess I missed that earlier, and that's on me. I should have said Gerard Powers too. When you talk about consistent players so far this year, you've had Campbell and then Cromartie and Powers, and I think, I mean, it's hard not to give it to Powers, or not to Powers not to give it to Campbell. I'm just gonna cop out and give it to him. The only other
That's fine. That's
I
fine.
could kind of think to give it to would be Tony Jefferson, because of how good he's been, and how versatile he's been, because he's been really good against the run and the pass. I mean, it's not just one, but it's been both. So I think it's got to be Calais, just because of how dominant he's been.
What about Rookie of the Year? Who would be your Rookie of the Year?
John Brown or Ed Stinson. Since I gave Brown the Offensive Player of the Year, I'll give Ed Stinson the Rookie of the Year, simply because I told them not to miss a beat. It's really, really important. So that's a rookie taking a 10-year veteran snaps and
Holding up.
And
being the same guy. Yeah. I'm going to go a different direction, though. He's not even the guy they drafted. Chandler Catanzaro. I think he, by far, and I would dare say that he's probably been the best and perhaps the most important offseason pickup that the Cardinals have made, because he's automatic. I mean, I say as a rookie, he's had more opportunities. I would give that Rookie of the Year to Catanzaro.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I probably should have done that. Dang it.
Well, I'm glad you didn't pick him. I was like, yes, you didn't pick him.
No, I think that's completely fair.
No, what are you looking forward to the rest of the season? 7-1. What should our expectations be moving forward? Especially since we're going to get Shaughnessy here back in a few weeks. So we've got about another month. We get Shaughnessy back. The Calais Campbell is getting healthy, and he looked like Calais again. Tyrann Mathieu looks like Tyrann Mathieu from a season ago. They've got some tough games coming up, but at 7-1, even 4-4, the rest of the way, you're looking at an 11-5 season. They haven't even been playing close to 500 football. Could we dare say 12, 13 wins, number one seed to get? Should we raise that bar, or should we hold back a little bit and still say playoffs?
I think at this point, and this is something you and I talked about pre-show, I think you have to readjust your expectations of this team, partially because of how good they've been, but partially because of how not just mediocre, but at times bad San Francisco, New Orleans, Carolina, Atlanta, even the Bears. I mean, you look at it, there's two teams in the East, two teams in the North. The South is just going to, the South is kind of like the NFC West a couple of years ago, and it looks like it could be a two-team race in the NFC West. So I think when you just look at it from that perspective, you have to feel like this team needs, with the 7-1 start, the basically 2-game lead in the tiebreaker because they have the head-to-head against the Eagles. You should be looking at a first-round bye at this point because, like you said, if they go 4-4 the rest of the way, we're not saying they will, but if they go 4-4 the rest of the way, they're 11-5. I think a lot of other teams are going to struggle to get to 11 wins, so I think that's fair.
All right. And what we've got, so we've got a Cardinals team that is now a front runner. They still haven't even scratched the surface of what we think that they can do, especially offensively. So we've got a front running team right now who has the potential to be even better. That I can't even get my mind around that. So I'm gonna kind of let that go. See what happens. I'm actually mildly concerned about the Rams game coming up. And Cardinals fans, Revenge of the Birds listeners, Revenge of the Birds radio listeners, I will have a preview show with 3K from Turf Show Times, our SB Nation St. Louis Rams blog. And we'll be able to talk a little bit about that. But this game has me a little bit concerned, not overly concerned because it's at home, but it seems like the Rams have found their pass rush, which worries me a little bit. But
I think that's fair to be kind of worried about that, especially with how good their interior is. Aaron Donald's a star already, and even though they're better than Jonathan Cooper apparently, the Cardinals guards haven't been great this year. So I think you're waiting to see what happens in that situation because the Cardinals guards haven't been great. So let's see what happens and how they play and if they end up, holding up against that pass rush.
All right. Well, that'll wrap it up. That'll wrap it up for our show tonight. Seth, thanks for coming on. Thanks for taking up a lot of time where we are reaching yet again another 90-minute show thereabouts. So thanks for putting up with us again. You could, if you're listening via download, please visit revengeofthebirds.com. If you are one of the listeners from one of the other sources and not from the site, please visit Revenge of the Birds. It's the best Arizona Cardinals community you can find. Seth writes stuff, I write stuff. There's a whole bunch of good writing on that site and great conversation. Arizona Cardinals fans, it's been great. You will hear from us again. You'll hear from me and 3K from Turf Show Times later in the week, and you will hear from us, Seth and me. You will hear from us again next week after hopefully a Cardinals victory over the Rams, but they will be 8-1. Everybody, have a good night. Thanks for listening. Have a good day. Have a good night whenever it is whenever you happen to be doing right now. But thanks for listening.
Have a good one, everybody.
You've been listening to Revenge of the Birds. Keep the conversation going by visiting revengeofthebirds.com. Follow us on Twitter at Revenge of Birds. You can also find us on iTunes at facebook.com/revengeofthebirds.